Mr. President, colleagues, ladies, gentlemen, our discussion today demonstrates how deeply we all share the concern with regard to global climate change and how much we're all interested in redoubling the international effort to address this issue. Whether this effort proves successful will largely determine the future of our planet, the development prospects of each country, as well as the well-being and quality of life of our citizens. We believe there is a solid legal framework for international collaboration in controlling and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, namely the universal agreements reached under the UN auspices. I'd like to stress that Russia treats its international commitments with the utmost responsibility in this sphere, and I refer in particular to the implementation of the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. We take active effort in Russia to build modern legislation that allows both controlling carbon emissions and creating incentives for their reduction. Yesterday, I presented my annual address to the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, and among our social and economic priorities, I listed the task of significantly reducing the net accumulated emissions in our country by 2050. I'm confident that despite Russia's size, its geography, climate, and economic structure, this task is achievable. We shouldn't forget, as colleagues have already pointed out throughout this summit, recollecting the 90s, as compared to the 1990 level, Russia has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions to a greater extent than many other countries. Our emissions have halved, dropping from 3.1 billion tons to 1.6 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. This has become possible because of a fundamental restructuring of our industry and energy that has been underway for the last 2 decades. As a result, as of now, 45% of our energy mix is accounted for by low-emission energy sources, including nuclear generation. And, as is well known, the greenhouse gas emissions from nuclear power plants stand at almost zero throughout all of the life cycle of nuclear power plants. We intend to further improve our capacities for using associated petroleum gas and carry out a large-scale campaign for environmental modernization and greater energy efficiency across all economic sectors to ensure carbon capture, storage, and use from all sources. We're also building an infrastructure for producing hydrogen to be used both as a fuel and an energy source. I'd like to take note in that regard that Russia has launched a pilot project in Sakhalin region for creating a carbon pricing system and a mechanism for carbon trading. This project will allow this Russian region to become carbon neutral as soon as by 2025. It is no secret that the conditions that facilitated global warming and associated problems go way back. But what kind of comprehensive solutions to these issues can we see today? First, carbon dioxide can stay in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So it's not enough to tackle the issue of new emissions. It is also important to take up the task of absorbing the CO2 that has accumulated in the atmosphere. Let me say that without exaggeration, Russia makes a gigantic contribution to absorbing global emissions, both ours and from elsewhere, owing to the great absorption capacities of our ecosystems that are estimated at around 2.5 billion tons of CO2 equivalent per annum. Second, we need to take into account each and every factor contributing to global warming. To cite an example, methane accounts for 20% of all anthropogenic emissions, and The greenhouse effect of a single ton of methane is 25 to 28 times stronger than that of a ton of CO2. So supposing we can halve methane emissions in the next 3 decades, experts project global temperatures to decrease by 2050 by 0.18 degrees centigrade, which incidentally makes up to 45% of the difference between the current temperatures and the objectives under the Paris Agreement. In this regard, it would be imperative to foster a broad and efficient international cooperation in calculating and monitoring all harmful emissions into the atmosphere. We invite all those interested countries to join collaborative scientific research, to jointly invest in climate projects that can make a difference in real life, and to actively pursue new low-carbon technologies for mitigation and adaptation. Third, I am convinced that the fight for preserving our climate should certainly unite the efforts of the international community as a whole. Russia is willing to propose a whole range of joint projects and to consider potential benefits even for foreign companies that would like to invest in clean technologies, including in our countries. And lastly, global development should not only be green, it should also be sustainable in every sense of the word. And this applies to all countries without exception. Accordingly, this development should go hand in hand with progress on such important tracks as fighting poverty and bridging development gaps between countries. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that Russia is genuinely interested in galvanizing international cooperation so as to look further for effective solutions to climate change, as well as to all other vital global challenges. Essentially, it's the end goal of our today's video summit too. Thank you for your attention.